That night, as Paul stepped into Mia's family estate, he had no idea his life was about to take an irreversible turn. The grand house radiated old money sophistication, crystal chandeliers shimmering under golden light, the rich scent of aged whiskey mingling with a faint spice of roasted lamb. He should have been focused on his fiancée, her delicate hand wrapped around his arm, but the moment he laid eyes on Grant Crawford, everything shifted. Mia's father wasn't what Paul had expected. Grant had a presence, one that commanded attention with little more than a glance. His salt and pepper hair was effortlessly tousled, his storm gray eyes sharp and calculating, as if he could peel away the layers of someone's soul with a single look. When they shook hands, the grip was firm, lingering just a second too long, long enough for something hot and inexplicable to spark between them. "So, you're the man my daughter is marrying," Grant said, his voice low, smooth, edged with something unreadable. Paul swallowed, unnerved by the quiet intensity behind those words. A smirk ghosted over Grant's lips, as if he already knew a secret Paul had yet to uncover. That was the moment everything began. Paul told himself it was nothing, just nerves, just the pressure of meeting his future father-in-law for the first time. But that didn't explain why his palms still felt warm long after their handshake, why his heartbeat stuttered when Grant's gaze lingered on him across the dinner table. Seated beside Mia, Paul tried to focus on her voice, on the way she beamed at her father, unaware of the tension crackling between the two men. But Grant was impossible to ignore. Every movement, his slow sip of whiskey, the way his fingers drummed lightly against the table, felt deliberate. There was an ease about him, a quiet confidence that unnerved Paul. When Grant spoke, his voice was low and controlled, threading through conversations like silk, effortlessly commanding attention. "So, Paul," Grant mused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "Mia tells me you're an architect. Passionate about structure, about making things fit exactly where they should." His gaze flicked to Paul's hands, his lips curving ever so slightly. "I imagine precision is important to you." Paul swallowed hard, unsure why the words sent an odd shiver down his spine. "It is," he admitted, clearing his throat. "Good," Grant murmured, taking another slow sip of his drink. The conversation moved on, but Paul felt the weight of Grant's presence like a brand against his skin. Every time he looked up, he found those storm gray eyes already on him, watchful, assessing. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something dangerous. Paul told himself he was imagining things. But later, when Grant passed behind him as they all said their goodnights, a hand brushed against his lower back, subtle, fleeting, yet undeniably intentional. Paul barely contained his breath. He wasn't imagining anything. Paul tried to shake the lingering sensation of Grant's touch, convincing himself it had been incidental. But deep down, he knew better. That fleeting contact, that deliberate pressure at the small of his back, was too purposeful to be dismissed as accidental. And it wasn't just that. Grant had been watching him all evening, studying him, almost as if he were testing something, waiting for a reaction. A week later, Paul found himself alone in Grant's study. Mia had encouraged him to spend more time with her father, saying she loved how they were getting along. If only she knew the storm of unease, and something darker, building in Paul's chest. The study smelled like leather and aged books, a quiet, intimate space filled with carefully arranged artifacts of a man who had lived deliberately, who liked control. Paul traced his fingers along the spines of old novels, exhaling slowly. "You like architecture, but have you ever admired the structure of a man?" The voice was smooth, composed, and just behind him, Paul stiffened, his pulse spiking. He turned slowly to find Grant standing too close, his presence filling the space between them. "Excuse me." Paul's voice was steady, but his breath betrayed him. Grant didn't smirk, didn't tease. Instead, his gaze was piercing, searching. "I see the way you look at me, Paul. I see the hesitation. You're trying to convince yourself it's not there." He took a step closer, the air thick between them. "But it is." Paul's mouth went dry, his skin buzzing from the sheer force of Grant's presence. His body knew the truth before his mind could reject it. "This is a mistake," Paul whispered, yet he made no move to leave. And Grant just waited, like he knew Paul wasn't going anywhere. Paul tried to deny it, tried to push away the way Grant's presence had ignited something deep inside him. But it lingered, an ache just beneath his skin, a restless energy that wouldn't subside. It wasn't just the way Grant spoke to him, or how his gaze seemed to peel away Paul's carefully constructed walls. It was how easy it was to fall into the tension between them. How dangerously natural it felt. Days passed, but the weight of that moment in the study followed Paul like a shadow. He told himself it was nothing, that he had imagined the heat in Grant's eyes. The unspoken challenge in his words. But when he found himself at Grant's house again, alone, it was impossible to ignore the pull tightening between them. "You've been avoiding me," Grant said, his voice smooth as he poured them both a drink. "I've been busy," Paul deflected, but even he could hear the hollowness in his voice. Grant stepped closer, placing a glass in Paul's hand. His fingers brushed against Paul's knuckles, slow and deliberate. "No," he said, tilting his head slightly, studying him. "You've been thinking about me." Paul's breath hitched. He wanted to deny it, to step back and regain control of himself. But Grant's confidence was a gravitational force, pulling him in, unraveling his resolve. "Tell me I'm wrong," Grant murmured, his voice a quiet, steady demand. Paul swallowed hard. He wanted to push Grant away, to put distance between them. But instead he stayed. His grip tightened around the glass in his hand. And Grant noticed. His lips curved into something dangerously knowing. "That's what I thought," Grant whispered. And just like that, the tension between them stretched impossibly taut, waiting for one of them to break. Paul knew he should have left. Every instinct screamed at him to put distance between himself and Grant before the heat between them turned into something irreparable. But his body betrayed him, keeping him rooted to the spot. His breath uneven, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The air between them had thickened, charged with something Paul could no longer pretend wasn't there. Grant stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his presence overwhelming. He reached for Paul's empty glass, taking it from his trembling fingers. His touch was fleeting, but it sent a current through Paul's body, leaving his skin burning where they had connected. Grant set the glass aside, never breaking eye contact. "You don't have to fight this," Grant murmured, his voice velvet and assured. The way a man speaks when he knows he's already won. Paul swallowed hard, his throat dry. "This is wrong," he whispered, but the conviction in his voice was weak. Grant's lips curled into the faintest smirk, like he could see right through him. "Then walk away." Paul stiffened, but his feet refused to move. His hesitation was a confession, and Grant saw it for what it was. He reached out, fingers grazing Paul's jaw, a barely there touch that sent shivers racing down his spine. Paul sucked in a sharp breath, but he didn't pull away. He couldn't. "That's what I thought," Grant murmured, his voice dangerously low. And then, without hesitation, he closed the remaining space between them, his lips capturing Paul's in a slow, deliberate kiss. The moment their mouths met, every thought of restraint shattered. Paul's body responded before his mind could catch up, his hands fisting into Grant's shirt, pulling him closer. He was lost, drowning in the heat, and for the first time, he didn't want to be saved. Paul sat in his car outside Grant's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Guilt gnawed at his conscience, but something darker, something undeniable, kept pulling him back. The memory of Grant's mouth against his. The way his touch had unraveled him so effortlessly played on repeat in his mind. He had told himself he wouldn't come back, that what happened between them had been a mistake. But here he was. Before he could convince himself otherwise, the front door opened, and Grant stood there, silhouetted in the warm glow of the entryway. He didn't look surprised to see Paul. If anything, he looked pleased, amused even. "You've been sitting there for 10 minutes, Grant called out. His voice was smooth, patient, as if he already knew the outcome. "Are you coming in? Or are you just going to torment yourself all night?" Paul exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He knew he should leave. He should put the car in reverse and disappear before this went any further. But instead, he reached for the door handle. The walk up the pathway felt like stepping into something inevitable, something irreversible. Grant didn't move as Paul approached, but when he was close enough, Grant's fingers brushed over his wrist, lingering for just a second longer than necessary. "You look like a man who's lost the fight with himself," Grant murmured, his eyes searching Paul's face. Paul swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm doing." Grant's lips quirked. "Liar." And then he was pulling Paul inside, shutting the door behind them. This time, there was no hesitation, no words left unspoken, only the fire that had already consumed them both. The night unraveled in a slow, intoxicating haze, every movement charged with an electricity that neither of them could deny anymore. Paul's breath hitched as Grant's fingers traced lazy patterns over his skin, the warmth of his touch branding him in ways he wasn't sure he'd ever recover from. There was no more hesitation, no more fighting the inevitable. Their bodies pressed together in the dim glow of the fireplace, the flickering light casting shifting shadows across their entwined forms. "You're still thinking too much," Grant murmured against Paul's jaw, his lips barely brushing the sensitive skin there. Paul's fingers dug into his back in response, anchoring himself in the moment, in the undeniable pull between them. Paul started, but the words dissolved into a sharp inhale as Grant's hands moved lower, his touch firm and knowing. "Shoo," Grant whispered, his voice thick with something possessive, something dangerous. "Let go, Paul." And he did. Every lingering doubt, every ounce of guilt melted away as Paul surrendered to the fire between them. His body responded instinctively, arching into every touch, every kiss that left him breathless. Grant moved against him with a deliberate slowness, like he was savoring the moment, unraveling Paul piece by piece. Their mouths met again, this time desperate, hungry, the kind of kiss that left no room for questions, only answers that neither of them could ignore any longer. Paul knew this was dangerous, that there would be consequences. But in that moment, with Grant's body pressed against his pulse roaring in his ears, none of it mattered. Because for the first time in a long time, Paul wasn't running. He wasn't pretending. He was exactly where he wanted to be. The morning after was bathed in an eerie stillness. The kind that stretched between two people who had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Paul lay beneath the sheets, his body still tingling with the phantom traces of Grant's touch. The heat of the night lingering on his skin like an unspoken promise. He should have felt regret, should have been drowning in guilt, but all he felt was the unbearable weight of what? Beside him, Grant stirred, his arm draping lazily over Paul's waist, his breath warm against the nape of his neck. "You're thinking again," Grant murmured, his voice rough with sleep. Paul exhaled shakily. I know," Grant cut him off, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to Paul's shoulder. "But I don't regret it, and neither do you." Paul swallowed hard, his pulse erratic. He wanted to deny it, to rewrite the past few hours into something less significant, but he couldn't. He turned to face Grant, meeting his gaze, stormy, unreadable, but undeniably sure. "Mia," Paul finally whispered. "What are we going to do?" Grant's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he leaned in, his fingers tracing the curve of Paul's cheek. "We'll figure it out," he said. "But don't pull away from me now." Paul closed his eyes, his resolve crumbling under the weight of everything they had become. Because he knew there was no turning back. The air was thick with tension as Paul stood outside Mia's apartment, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, yet no amount of preparation could soften the inevitable blow. The weight of his betrayal pressed against his ribs, making it hard to breathe. When Mia finally opened the door, her expression was unreadable, her eyes scanning his face with a quiet intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "You should have told me," she said, her voice steady, but laced with something deeper, something fractured. Paul swallowed, his throat dry. "I never meant to hurt you." She let out a bitter laugh, crossing her arms. "But you did." He wanted to explain, to tell her that it hadn't been planned, that every moment with Grant had felt inevitable, like gravity pulling him towards something he couldn't resist. But none of that would make a difference now. Mia exhaled sharply. "Are you in love with him?" The answer sat heavy on his tongue. Slowly, he nodded. A flicker of something, pain, realization, acceptance, crossed her face. "Then I hope it was worth it." And with that, she closed the door, leaving Paul standing in the wreckage of what once was. Life is rarely as simple as right or wrong, and love often arrives in ways we don't expect, or even want. Paul's story is a reminder that honesty with ourselves and those we care about is crucial, even when the truth is painful. In today's world, where relationships are often complicated by expectations, societal norms, and personal fears, it's important to acknowledge our true feelings rather than suppress them. Avoiding hard conversations may seem easier, but in the long run, honesty and self-acceptance lead to genuine happiness. Love is never without consequences, but living authentically is always worth a risk.